truck full of drunken men tried to force me to pull over in the middle of the night on a dark, desolate road. I've been really into this sub lately, and it has inspired me to share a few of my unnerving stories. This happened ages ago, when I was 21. I was a manager for a big box store, but in a town that was an hour drive from me. I lived in a small town and the store was in another small town, both about 12k people each, but in order to promote to manager I had to transfer, which meant doing this drive daily. I had hoped it would be temporary because I dreaded driving this every day, especially late at night because of deer, etc. This was also before cell phones were really the norm. I did have one, but it was one of those ancient bag-style phones, and I had just got it a week or two before. With these phones you had to plug them into your car lighter in order to have them work, and they had a corded attached handset. Anyway, one night I was driving home and it was really late, about 1 a.m. The drive is pretty desolate with houses sporadically throughout mixed with sections of wooded areas. About 20 minutes before my town is a random casino in the middle of BFE. I had just passed this casino and a truck pulled out behind me. I didn't think anything of it, but it was noticeable pretty quickly that they had been drinking because of their erratic driving. Because of this I just figured I'd just put as much room between us as possible. Also to note, as I was going past them they had their headlights on of course and could have easily seen I was a young girl by myself, so the truck comes up behind me at a pretty fast rate of speed and goes to pass me. As they are next to me they swerve a little towards me, and I just think they are much more drunk than I thought and slowed down so they could easily pass. As soon as they got in front of me though they started to slow down. Way down. It got to the point that we were going 20 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone and still slowing down, like they were trying to stop me. Every time they would get to around 5 miles per hour I would swerve to the opposite lane and give it some gas like I was going to pass, which would then make them temporarily speed up. I could also see a lot better into the truck at this point. It was an extended cab truck with what appeared to be 5 or 6 guys in it. This was during hunting season, so it wasn't out of the norm to see groups of guys acting ridiculous and drunk this time of year, so they were trying to stop me and I didn't want to necessarily pass given what had just happened, but at a certain point I had to. So I go to try and pass the truck, but it blocks me from doing so by getting in the middle of both lanes. I try this a couple times with the same results. Then finally I try to floor it and pass in the truck, but it tries to run me off the road. I immediately get back behind them and am freaking out at this point. I had tried calling 911, but there was a huge area with no coverage yet and I couldn't get through. After what seemed like forever I finally get through to them and they send someone out immediately. As I'm on the phone with them I see car lights in my rear view and am filled with panic. BC, I know this car will inevitably try to pass given we are only going about 30 at this point. Sure as shit the car comes up behind us and goes to pass. And sure as shit the truck actually runs them off the road and into the ditch. I'm telling the 911 dispatcher this and in a full-blown panic. We are getting close to town now though and I can see the first stoplight. I wasn't sure what the truck was going to do because our one lane splits into 2 and there are gas stations etc. up ahead. Right as we approach the first light I see an officer come in the opposite direction and I start flashing them over and over while telling the dispatcher that I see the officer. The officer makes a U-turn and gets in between me and the truck. He flicks the lights on them to pull them over and they pull into a gas station at the main intersection of our town. I follow into the gas station to assist the police in whatever statements they may need and want to make sure these assholes are actually arrested. That didn't end up being a problem. BC, they refused a breathalyzer, so they were taken to the hospital where a blood alcohol level was obtained. I really wanted to know more, but the officer didn't elaborate. I kind of wish I would have called up and followed up on it. They never called me or anything to do anything in court, so I'm guessing they didn't need me, but it also means that they got away with only getting a DUI. I didn't realize this wasn't okay until way later, much too late to have done anything about it. All I know is the officer said they were all 3 sheets to the wind. God only knows what their intent was, but I was terrified to find out. And thank God for that damn bag cell phone. It could have saved my life. Dark hooded figure at the end of the dirt road. This happened to me maybe over a week ago. I recently moved from a city to a more suburban area, and at the end of my street the paved road transitions to a dirt path that goes through the treeline of a wooded area. It's kind of bizarre, because while the area is suburban, there's a pretty lively town center pretty close by. Southwest, this place sticks out like a sore thumb. During the day, it honestly just looks like the street ends where the trees start, but it is a fully functioning road. At night, it looks like a wall of black. There are no streetlights in that direction. There's a highway nearby that you can see through some of the trees, but other than that, just darkness until the end of the road. This is where I bring my dog to do his business. Now, in the city, taking the dog out at night was never particularly creepy. You get some weirdos out at late hours, but for the most part it's lit up well enough. There were always noises. Apartment buildings had lights on. This is a complete 180 from that. Complete and total darkness. There are signs all over the property that discourage tenants at my new place from taking their dog out on the grounds. That doesn't stop people anyway, but I listen cause I'm a new tenant and don't want to get on the wrong foot with my landlord, so I take him through the pitch black forest path at night. Most nights, you hear the occasional rustling. Sometimes my dog likes to perk up like he sees or smells something in the bushes, but it's business as usual. One night, I take him out a little later than usual. I'm not worried. I haven't run into anyone at all during my night walks with the dog, and I thought it would be no different this time around. We get walking down the path, and at the end of the road there was a silhouette. I get a little weirded out. I can't make any physical features out other than them wearing dark clothing and a hood. My dog perks up at the sight of the person, and we wait in the path, completely surrounded by trees and brush. Paranoia starts to get the better of me. This is a perfect setting for an ambush. I don't know who or what could be in these bushes while I'm distracted by the first person I've ever seen on this road. The other strange thing was that they seemed like they weren't moving, like at all. They were positioned at the end of the road, just looking in on me and my dog. My instincts start to kick in at this point. I truly did not feel safe, and I booked it with my dog running back in the direction that we came, looking back to see if we were being followed until we got back to my street. As we were rounding the corner back toward my building, I saw the silhouette again coming out of the darkness and onto the street. I didn't want to stick around and see what they were up to. In reality, they were probably just as spooked as I was and just wanted out as fast as possible too. Who knows? Anyway, just a dumb little encounter I had that sorta creeped me out. A creepy van stopped and blocked the middle of my rural country road. This experience took place when I was a senior in high school. I had driven to visit a friend who lived in the next town over from me. It was still daytime, and I knew the road so well I could have driven it blindfolded. It's a very curvy road, surrounded by tall trees on both sides, houses with long driveways here and there along the road, all pretty dispersed. My parents lived about 10 minutes away from town on this road, and I drove it every day to school as well. The road is just outside of city limits, so there were never cops on it, and most people I passed always went well over the speed limit. I was listening to music with my window down when I spotted a white van, the stereotypical kidnapper type of van, driving in the same direction as me up ahead. When I got behind them, I had to slow my speed about 20 miles per hour, because they were driving extremely slow. I thought that was more annoying than creepy at the time. I creeped along behind them, making comments to myself like, "What the fuck are they doing? Come on, dude. Speed up." The first curve we rounded, the van merged into the opposite lane. It should be noted that this is a dangerous curve. If a car was coming in the opposite lane, you would hit them head-on, as the trees created a blind spot. I backed off a little and was scared he would wreck and I would be collateral damage if so. I honked my horn at him, furious, to make it known that he needed to get his shit together and stay in his lane. He continued driving in the opposite lane, and soon we approached the next dangerous curve. I got a pit in my stomach, thinking this person was clearly drunk or high and not able to drive. In that moment, I glanced at his license plate thinking I would call and report him for reckless driving, which I never did, but this was different. The van had no license plate on it at all. Even more odd, the van took the second curve, an even more dangerous curve with a bigger blind spot, and was so far over in the other lane, that it almost looked intentional, not like an accidental crossing of the double yellow line. I honked again, making it clear I was furious. Just past this curve, there was a very short straight stretch of road. Even though there are double lines, this is the place I knew I could pass him if I gunned it. I slightly merged into the opposite lane to see if any cars were coming. And when I did this, I noticed the van slowing down even more. Almost to a complete stop. I yelled, "What the fuck, dude?" and the van was now in the middle of the road, halfway in both lanes, meaning I couldn't pass him. I started getting super nervous, my heart basically stopped beating, when I realized there were no houses around, and I was stuck behind him. That's when I saw his brake lights light up again, and the van came to a complete stop in the middle of the fucking road. I stopped my car, panicked. Then the van slightly creeped forward again, but turned sideways, blocking the entire road now. That's when I knew whoever was driving was probably about to attempt to do something sinister to me. Now, I know this road well. I know the ditches, the curves, everything. A large man with a beard opened the driver's door of the van and stepped out slowly, glaring at me with a dead look in his eyes. I don't know what came over me. I thought to myself, of fuck no. I wasn't scared anymore, I was furious. I turned my wheel sharply to the right, and pressed the gas, and with barely enough room between the nearest tree and the side of the van, my car squeezed past the van in the ditch. I saw the man in my rear view mirror as he ran back towards his van door and hopped in. I knew he was about to follow me, and I've never driven so fast in my life. Thank God I knew every curve, which gave me an advantage. I see my parents' house coming up, and I whipped into their driveway and sped to a stop inside their garage where the van couldn't see my car. I made it just in time, and I saw the van pass their house as I stood at the edge of the garage and peered out, hidden behind their garage refrigerator. I told my mom and dad about it, crying hysterically. I never could report what happened with an official license plate number, because the van didn't have one. I did call and tell the police department what had happened with a general description of the men and van. But since the road was outside of city limits, they told me I should call the sheriff's department and they'd send someone to attempt to get the van for reckless driving. I don't know who that man was or what he was intending to do to me, but I was terrified to drive that road for a very long time afterwards. I never saw the van again. Followed down a dark country road. Last year, I, 18F, was living in a very rural town in the middle of the mountains. Most small western towns only have one road that goes into the big city. Our road in particular was about 50 miles of empty highway, surrounded only by cliffs, fields, and occasionally a farm. At the very entrance to this road, once you enter the city, is a huge truck stop/gas station that is always packed. My mom and I were going back home after a midnight showing of whatever movie we had decided to see, and, as per usual, we stopped to fill up on gas and get a drink for the long drive. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy older Jeep pull out the same time we did, but of course, I didn't take much notice of it. It wasn't weird that someone would be leaving the same time as us. As we started down the pitch-black road, the Jeep kept a steady pace behind us, again not weird, until it came flying up past us before disappearing behind a hill. Mom and I just scoffed. We were going 60, but when people knew the roads well, they often drove them at close to 100, even at night. Eventually, we came up to the Jeep from before. It was pulled over, but the back half of the vehicle was in the road, and what was clearly a man's arm was waving out the window, gesturing for us to pull over. Of course, we pass it. The man flies past us once more and pulls over again. He does this once more, and my mom and I begin to get very nervous. After passing him for the third time, he flies up and begins tailgating us. He's driving so close that we can't see his headlights in the rear view mirror, and he's honking his horn every so often, waving his arm for us to pull over. He carries on with this for 30 minutes. Mom and I are terrified. She's white-knuckling the wheel. I'm holding a pocket knife to make myself feel better. I swore at my mom for the first time that night, begging her, "Don't you fucking dare pull over." If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that is all that was going through my mind. The road is a dead zone for service, so we couldn't call the police or anyone. The picture of us dead or worse on the side of the empty road was the only thing I could think about. But, as soon as it had started, it ended. The man slammed on his brakes, turned around, and went back. The ride home was silent, and I ended up sleeping in my mom's room out of fear, The next morning we had a discussion and came to the conclusion he had seen two lone women traveling at night and thought we'd be easy pickings, which he would have been right. Some people suggest that he had seen us drop money or a receipt at the gas station and wanted to be a good Samaritan. I think that's ridiculous. Nobody following two women home in such an aggressive manner has good intentions. We moved out of town a few months later for unrelated reasons, but just before we did, the same car was reported following a group of 4 men on their way to work. So, maybe he just likes to scare people. Either way, that night was easily one of the scariest of my life. Why I don't like driving on country roads at night. A few years ago, my sister decided to have a surprise 30th birthday for her husband. Since he missed his senior prom, she decided to make that the theme of the party, and even booked the same hall his prom was hosted in when he was a teenager. Problem is, my brother-in-law grew up in basically the middle of nowhere, a small, rural Missouri town that you have to leave the highway and travel down about 5 miles of heavily wooded backroads to get to. On top of being so isolated, there's a rather large heroin problem out there, both using and dealing. It's a pretty potent cocktail, but my sister was determined to have the party there. The party was at 6, and my original plan was to drive out with my sister and her friends to help set up. My sister was heavily pregnant at the time and needed all the help she could get, and then drive back home with her. However, I got called into work and had to stay until 4, so I told my sister I would drive up by myself as soon as I was done. She warned me that it was pretty easy to get turned around on those country roads, but I had Google Maps to help me and didn't worry about it. The drive up was fine. It was late September, my favorite time of year, and the scenery was surprisingly pretty. I found the place, no problem, and helped with some last-minute setup before my brother-in-law showed up. The party was a lot of fun, and lasted until about 11. When the hall closed, I was one of the last people to leave, having stayed behind to help my sister and her friend stack chairs. Brother-in-law had overindulged at the open bar and had to be driven home by his friend. We ended up not actually heading out until almost midnight, and by that point, I was exhausted. My sister once again warned me about being careful on the back roads, but I'd gotten up there okay, so I wasn't too concerned about the drive home. I hugged her goodbye, hopped into my car, and started working my way back to the highway. Unfortunately, in my sleepy state, I misjudged which road I was supposed to turn off as I reached the exit for the highway, and ended up turning down an entirely different road that ran parallel to it instead. It was another heavily wooded and narrow back road. I started looking for somewhere I could pull in to turn around. After driving maybe 200 yards, I spotted a gravel embankment, and decided to pull in there so I could get turned around. I pulled in and made a sharp U-turn so I could head back up the road, and as I lifted my head to check no one was coming, I saw it in my driver's side mirror, a figure in a dark blue t-shirt and jeans, with long black hair and a pale face, illuminated in my brake lights. My heart jumped into my throat as I gasped in fright. But after a second of pure panic, I realized that the pale face was actually a mask, one of those cheap plastic white ones you get at costume stores. I immediately felt like an idiot. It was almost October, so obviously this was a Halloween decoration. This embankment probably led to someone's driveway, and the family who lived there probably had tons of things just like it in their yard. I took a moment to unclench my hands from the steering wheel and let my heart rate get back to normal, and ended up catching a glimpse of the thing in my mirror again. And I noticed that the embankment didn't lead to a driveway. There was nothing else behind me but tall grass and trees. I briefly wondered why anyone would put a Halloween decoration out in the middle of nowhere. And then the decoration took a step forward. I slammed on the gas and shot forward, eventually getting back to the main road and onto the highway. I don't think I stopped shaking until I reached my town's city limits half an hour later. Looking back, I definitely wasn't in any danger. I was in a car, all the doors were locked, and I could easily have run down whoever that creep was if they tried anything. If they'd gotten even one step closer when panic mode set in, that's probably what I would have done. It was probably just a kid or local druggie in a crappy mask, giving motorists a good scare and not really thinking about the consequences. But still, it was definitely one of the creepiest moments of my life. And I'm still nervous driving down secluded country roads at night these days.